Hey friends, Mr. E here, and today I've got a bit of an interesting discussion sort of video here. This is going to be a discussion about class balance and the power levels of classes in Darktide. A very, very popular topic. Every time I discuss what's the most powerful class, what's the weakest class, the video is super massive and you guys seem to love it. But today I really want to talk about the two separate groups of classes. This is something that I really started to hone in on about a month and a half ago. After the Hive Scum launched, I started to realize that there are two groups within Darktide. And if you watch my recent video on the Hive Scum, where I talked about how I think the Hive Scum is in that upper tier of characters, I referred to the lower echelon of characters as the martial classes. Now, the martial classes are exactly what it sounds like martial arts, right? They are physically sort of capable classes that the main way they get stuff done in the game is by rolling up their sleeves and getting their hands dirty. They go out there and they crack skulls and they stab people in the back, and they have to do the vast majority of their work through physical force. That would be the Ogren, the Arbites, and the Zealot. Those three classes, they have some powerful magical abilities somewhere in there, things like taunt and that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, almost all of their capabilities come down to whack the bad man with the pointy stick. Then, on the other hand, you have the other three classes. You have that other cohort of classes that are much more powerful, I think, in the current iteration of Darktide. And I was sort of exploring this, and I was thinking about that because the term martial classes, I derived from the same thing in Dungeons & Dragons, D&D. And I realized that the connection goes much, much deeper because D&D has a very similar class balance problem as we do in Darktide. And so that's what I want to explore here today. So those of you in the watching audience, the viewing audience that are Dungeons & Dragons knowers, hey, what's up, homies? I'm going to try to not, beat you over the head with stuff you already know, but we're going to be exploring the balance between a hypothetical martial and a hypothetical caster class. If you are a absolute novice and you have no idea what Dungeons & Dragons is about, don't worry, I got you. I'm a veteran of the system, I'm a DM, and I'm also going to be spending a lot of time relating this to how Darktide class balance is sort of shaking out, because I think there is kind of a shocking amount of overlap here in the problems with class design between characters who have access to magical abilities, for instance, and characters who fundamentally don't. So if you like Darktide, if you like Dungeons & Dragons, if you like Mr. E, well, then you know what to do. You got to subscribe to the channel so you can catch more Darktide content. Hey, maybe I'll do D&D at some point, who knows? And of course, you could also become a channel member if you really want to support me directly. A great way to support me, and you'll get access to the Discord, plus a lot more. Okay, let's start here. Let's start with explaining what I mean when I say martial classes. This is a term that, as far as I know, was derived from D&D, where it describes a cohort of classes that are the physical attackers. This is things like rangers, fighters, barbarians, rogues, those sort of people. As these characters level and progress through the ranks and get more and more powerful, they gain abilities that allow them to attack more times, or be more accurate with their shots, be more fleet on their feet, or perhaps even recuperate damage or block out damage if you're a frontliner of some sort. However, these characters don't ever get access to spells. They are restricted to fighting enemies in what would be sort of considered a normal way. You could see, a actual person fighting in the way that these characters do in our real realm. On the other hand, you have a cohort of classes that are called caster classes, and these are the actual fantastical classes, right? These are the druid, the wizard, the sorcerer, the warlock. They get actual literal magic. They can cast spells. And although at early ranks, these characters are probably not going to stand toe-to-toe with those more martial classes, what happens is as they level and they get access to more and more spells and magical abilities, they start to have a scaling issue. And I think many veteran D&D players are aware of this, which is that casters in the late game, especially, pretty early on, honestly, in the leveling process, start to completely overshadow anything you can do as a martial class, especially once you reach level 10 and beyond, which is a lot of times where people's campaigns are starting to wrap up. But today, I want to make an example out of this because you'll see exactly, if you're thinking with your brain and remembering how this relates to Darktide, you will see exactly what I'm talking about by the end, and how these two different groups are kind of not healthy for the balance of the game and make it really, really hard to balance the game around both groups. So for our example today, we're going to be looking at probably the two most standard classes within each cohort. For the martial classes, we'll be talking about a fighter. That will be a level 5 fighter. And for the caster classes, we'll be talking about a level 5 wizard. So the most important thing you can do as a fighter every round is to attack enemies, right? And a level 5 fighter, I've got the stat block up here. This is the 5th edition SRD that shows you what you get as you progress all the way to level 5. So a level 5 fighter, they've usually got some good improvements to their base attack damages. They get the ability Action Surge, which will be important here in a second, and they get an extra attack. So a fighter can attack 2 times per turn and once per short rest, meaning, once per combat or so, they can activate Action Surge, which allows them to take another action, and they can use that to attack 2 more times. Let's assume that this fighter is doing roughly 10 damage with an attack, and they can attack, if they use Action Surge, in a sort of a burst, they can deal 40 damage in that turn. That's quite considerable. Like that's not that's not a small amount of damage. So that is sort of the absolute cap for the fighter. There's a couple other things you could do with your class and racial and whatever. You might hit crits or whatever, but let's just assume for just the general argument's sake that the fighter hits for about 40 damage in a turn. Now we have to compare the fighter to the level 5 wizard. And there is no complete wizard, and there's no discussing the wizard without talking about their spells. At 5th level, you can see here, this wizard has 4 first level spells, 3 second level spells, and 2 third level spells. This is the number of spells they can cast per long rest, aka per day, generally. And that means that going into any combat, depending on what they've used up till then, they might have this many to blow. And there really is no way around discussing the spells that the wizard has at their disposal, and specifically third level spells, without discussing the third level spell, the one that sort of defines the wizard, which is Fireball. Fireball deals 8d6 worth of damage to every enemy within a 20-foot radius sphere. Or every character, not even every enemy, just everybody. And you can point this at any location within 150 feet of you. It takes exactly 1 action. If they fail their dexterity save, then they'll take the full damage. If they succeed in the dexterity save, they'll take half damage. A failed save will result in a character taking an average of 28 points of damage, and a succeeded save is half of that, right? So we would assume that somewhere in the middle there, on average, you'll be getting about 20-ish points of damage per character that you hit within the radius of the fireball. The problem with this is that Fireball hits every enemy or every character within a 20-foot radius sphere, which is an absolutely massive area. This single-handedly takes combats that would previously have been untenable with, 5 to 10 or more enemies and turns them trivial, because the Fireball can single-handedly erase any number of enemies that are grouped pretty tightly together. Keep in mind that a 20-foot radius sphere is 40 feet across in both dimensions. That is massive. So you can hit a metric fuck ton of enemies with this attack. Let's assume, just for instance, that we hit just 5 enemies, which I think is being, on the conservative side. You're doing 100 damage, sort of on average across all of these. How much could the fighter do on his best possible turn 1 time per combat? 40. And you have 2 fireballs to expend at any point during your day. So you come up against a combat that has 5 enemies, and you might save it and go for some other stuff, or you might blow it knowing that you have 1 more in your back pocket. Now, the best part about Fireball is that it gets better and better the more enemies are out there. And as you progress in challenge, as the threat level goes up, as you're progressing through your campaign, your DM is going to be sending more and more stuff at you because your players are more capable. And your fireballs are going to start to generate immense value, because if you hit 10 enemies for 20 damage each, you are now dealing 200 damage on a turn. So if you dealt 200 damage on a turn, let's take a trip back to the fighter here for a second. Remember that the fighter can deal 40 damage on one turn, but then he can't take any action surges again for the rest of the combat. So he's back to dealing 10 damage per attack 2 times per turn from that point on. That means that in order to deal 200 damage to enemies, he is having to take 9 rounds to do the same effect. 9 rounds. 9 rounds in Dungeons & Dragons is a veritable eternity. If you're not in the literal final battle of the entire years-long campaign, and your battle is going for 9 rounds, your Dungeon Master is looking down at their notes going, oh my fucking god, is there any way that I can have the enemies kill themselves so we can just wrap this shit up? Everybody at the table wants to die at that point. It's so boring. It's such a slog. So that amount of damage that can be burst out in a single action by the wizard is immense. And on the back of that, right, you might be thinking, oh, well, they only have 2 of these per day, but they have tons of other spells too, right? They have, at 5th level, they have 7 other leveled spells, which all deal some amount of damage as well. And a lot of these are comparable with the amount of damage that a fighter can do in a round, or they have other very powerful effects. And then they've got cantrips, which are infinite cast abilities that are pretty competitive in damage. Suffice to say, just by hitting a pretty good fireball at some point during your combat, you immensely tip the scales in your favor. It's good enough to bring a caster for pretty much any situation. A caster is going to be valuable no matter what, because there will always be a situation where magic can solve something that martial skills would really struggle to. And as you can see, as you progress through the levels, you get more and more and more spells that get more and more and more powerful and scale in the same way. The problem for fighters and other martial classes is that at best, you're going to get a little bit tankier, harder to kill. You'll have a few more attacks per turn, but no amount of extra attacks is ever going to add up or suffice to the ability to literally call down magic from the heavens. To put it this way, a level 20 fighter might be a legendary character, right? They are a character who might be a warlord or the strongest man to have ever lived, or, he's able to kill a giant all by himself. But a level 20 wizard or cleric is akin to a literal deity, right? These characters have powers that are otherworldly. They can wish things into existence. They can level entire cities with just their magic and their mind. So yeah, there really is no parity here, and that problem persists as you scale throughout the game. Now, you might be saying, all right, in order to balance these classes, Dungeons & Dragons must do something, right? And clearly one of the things they do is they make it so there's only a certain amount of spells you can cast per day. The fighter can fight no matter what. But what you do is you would just, as a DM, you'd think, oh, well, I need to get the spells out of this wizard so that he can't just blow up all my big bad guys, he can't blow up all my plants. So, simply put, right, you would, instead of just having 1 or 2 groups of big armies per day that the wizard will just blow up with fireball, you'll put 3 per day, right? You'll have an extra encounter so that you can tax the wizard and make them use those big blast spells, such as that there is a time that rolls around where they can't just blow everything up in a huge blast of fire. Or you'll structure your encounters to have some sort of counter spell or way to remove the threat of the fireball being able to just decimate the entire army. That's great and all. However, as a DM, and I hope I'm not gonna trigger PTSD in any former DMs here, there is a problem. If you design more encounters around the assumption that you do have a wizard with these crazy powerful abilities, or, God forbid you got a wizard and a sorcerer, you're fucked, right? Because both of them can cast Fireball, both of them can cast all sorts of crazy spells. How do you balance encounters around that? Because now, at any time, these two characters can start cracking out like tons and tons of magical abilities that just completely would just completely wreck your encounters. I've been in the situation, I'm certain many of you DMs have as well. You spend a week planning for the final encounter of an arc. You've got it all meticulously thought out, right? You've got the final showdown is with the big bad. You finally cut off all of his support and his resources, so it's just him and his most loyal men, like 20 or so dudes. You've got the big bad. It's in a church because you found a cool map for it online, so it's going to be in a church, and there's like the dude and then his left and right hand lieutenants and a couple of elite badasses, and then you've got 20 or so rabble, that just absolute jobbers, right? And those guys are there. Everybody's there for a reason. You've thought about this. You want the big bad guys and the elites. That's what your fighter and your monk are supposed to be dealing with. Meanwhile, there's going to be snipers sort of on the balconies around, and that's what the ranger should be focusing on. He'll have to pick up those guys because he's the only one with that like precision long distance damage. And then, of course, the meat and potatoes is that big horde of jobber enemies in the middle, and you're like, oh yeah, the wizard's gonna like have a ball with this one. They're gonna fucking fireball this shit and it's just over, right? And then the combat rolls around and you're ready to go, and you're like, okay, here it comes, and the wizard's turn is up, and they cast haste. They haste the veteran, or they haste the fighter, right? And the fighter is like, okay, cool, I get an extra attack return. You're like, okay, it's all good, right? Okay, they'll just do it next time around. They'll cast the fireball next time. And then the next turn rolls around, and your NPCs accidentally crit the wizard 2 times, and he goes down, and so he misses his turn and he doesn't cast fireball, and then everybody on the team gets surrounded, and you can't fireball anymore because you'll kill the entire team. And you're thinking, you look down at your notes as the DM, and you look down at your notes and you're thinking, oh my fucking god, I just killed the entire group. What the fuck? Why did the wizard not cast the fucking fireball? Oh my fucking god. But then, guys, former DMs out there, you know what we do, okay? Write it in the comments if you know. You know what it is. Of course, it's time to cheat, right? We bend the rules. We say, aha, you are now captured. Whereas before, it was clearly a fight to life or death, but it was actually my master plan all along, and you were captured by these enemies, and it leads to a whole nother arc. Yes, my devious scheme was successful. This was an unwinnable fight, guys. And you can sort of rest in the fact that your team is going to gaslight themselves into believing that this was in no way winnable, that this was a scripted loss. And you're like, God damn it. Okay, that is the problem. That is the problem. It's like, if you have the fireball, if you have these magical abilities, they will single-handedly sway the entire combat. So if you design combats around the expectation that you've got them, well, if you don't got them for whatever reason, then you're fucked. Because if you can't have the wizard deal 200 damage in a single turn, well, then the fighter is going to take 9 turns to do it, and everyone's going to want to rip their hair out. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly what is going on with Darktide. This is the turn, right? Hopefully you guys started to see the parallels there. Let me demonstrate something to you. Here is some gameplay footage. This is me versus 10 Crushers as the Zealot. Let's see how I do. Okay, so that was hard fought, but I got it done, right? That's pretty much what the Zealot can do. He's got the pointy stick, he goes stabby stabby, the Crushers die, it takes a lot of effort, A lesser player would absolutely get dunked on there, and I did a little bit, but hey, that is what it is. You're gonna take some licks, and that's why we're a tanky class, right? So we can take some hits and keep on ticking. Now, let me show you, for example, 10 Crushers versus the Veteran. Okay, so we got an issue here because the Veteran didn't have to work anywhere near as hard, and yeah, he gets to regenerate those grenades he just used. Okay, let's take 10 Crushers versus the Hive Scum. Yeah, okay, so you can see what I mean here. The rocket launcher is definitionally the fireball of Darktide. Simply point it in the direction of a bunch of things you don't want to be alive anymore, and they're all dead. And you get 4 of these things, right? How hard did I have to fight as the Zealot in order to kill those 10 Crushers? It was fucking hairy, and I'm going to tell you, to be honest with you, I died trying to record that 2 times before I actually got it right. So yeah, it's not easy at all to fight, but you have the Hive Scum on your team and you get 4 fuck you, it all die buttons and then you find another pack of grenades and you can do it again, right? You can do it again, or God forbid you get a Veteran on your team who can replenish all your grenades with a single ammo pack multiple times. And so how do you structure the balance of the game when you have a set of classes, the Ogryn, the Arbites, and the Zealot, who in order to fight these sorts of enemy compositions, which, you know, 10 Crushers seems like a lot, but go try out Havoc 40, guys. It's really not that crazy. If you are up against a horde of enemies that is that scary and that challenging, and you're one of the martial classes, god damn it, you better have some serious, like, you better be popping off right then in order to pull that out. But if you just swap classes to one of the 3 caster classes, the Psyker, the Veteran, or the Hive Scum, you can simply use your abilities and destroy all of it, right? You can just dunk on it with Flame Staff and then stacking up some uncanny strikes. You can throw crack grenades at it seemingly infinitely. You can just shoot it with 1 rocket launcher and then shoot it with another rocket launcher the next time it happens again. And so how do we balance the game? How does Fat Shark create a balanced and exciting encounter dynamic for the game where if you go into a game and you have 2 caster classes that can just blow up this level of threats, what do you do in order to challenge them? Well, you have to give them more and more threats. You have to keep sending this shit at them to the point where their resources are actually exhausted. You will have to send more than 4 packs of Crushers at the Hive Scum in order to get him to waste all of his rockets, and then he's supposedly vulnerable. Meanwhile, if you send that many Crushers at a fully martial class team, they're fucked. They're gonna die, right? They would literally never kill all of it. It would be like one of the greatest feats if you had 40 Crushers to encounter as a team. It would just be impossible without the caster classes there. And that is the dynamic at play here. You might say, like, okay, well, you know, but they're weaker otherwise, but I think we can both agree that they're not, right? These classes, the caster classes in Dungeons and Dragons, there's sort of like checks and balances, right? The caster classes are very frail. They are very easy to kill. They can be counterspelled. They can miss their spells. All sorts of things can happen that make your spells get less value. Every time you shoot a rocket in Darktide, it will get the full value. It will kill those Crushers. There's no dexterity check for the Crushers to take half damage. There is no, counterspell to your rockets, and there is also really no penalty to playing these caster classes. The Veteran and the Hive Scum and the Psyker are just as easy to survive with as the other classes in a lot of senses because they get really, really good evasion talents. They have ways of keeping enemies off of them. The Hive Scum, if you can understand how to dodge and, if you're a good Zealot player, you will produce better results simply just playing Hive Scum right now because his dodges are functionally better and his damage is better. He gets to do as much damage in melee. If he goes for a fully melee build, he can do as much damage as the Zealot or more with his melee setup, and then he also gets to cast Fireball. So you are a level 20 fighter, plus you get to cast like level 9 spells, right? It's that crazy that these characters have not only really solid martial skills at their disposal, right? A veteran can like two-piece a crusher with the power sword and gets some of the strongest like buffs to his melee damage in the game, but also he gets infinite ranged ammo with las weapons, of course. He gets infinite grenades. He has the most powerful ultimate ability in the game with Shout, which makes him and his team functionally like take no damage. The Psyker can just melt everything in the map, and he gets some of the strongest stuff as well. And so this is the problem, right? When we have a set of classes that can do these borderline, or in some cases, literally magic things, how do you sort of bridge that gap? How do you make the classes that do not have magic by definition, how do you make them equivalent? And that is a question for Fat Shark to answer, because it's up to them. Are we going to make our martial classes more and more magical to the point where they can start to do some of these things where they all have their own fireballs or their own crazy utility spells? Or are we going to reduce the number of spells these characters have to cast per day so that they can't just be constantly blasting and blowing up the whole map to the point where the other classes feel invalid? And I think that's the worst thing about it, right? I know a lot of people like to say, oh, well, you know, it's a PvE game, not a PvP game, right? So balance really isn't that important. But I think it's really important from a player sort of fun-having perspective. If you've got a Psyker or one of the caster classes on your team and you're playing an Auric level mission and that character knows what they're doing, they're going to steal your fun from you because they're going to kill 75% of stuff just by themselves, right? Thankfully, a lot of those players are going into Havoc and they're having their fun there. But like, Havoc mode is designed around the assumption that we have these super, super powerful caster classes, and attempting it without them is like hell. And that's the true balance problem that Darktide has, is they're trying to compensate. They're trying to make every encounter have enough threat in it because they're compensating for casters. But then if you don't bring casters, you're fucked. So anyway, that's the conversation, guys. And I don't know what Fat Shark will do about it, if anything. In my opinion, as I'll talk about in my State of the Game, in my opinion, I think it would be better if we brought them down a little bit. I think that the sweet spot is somewhere below where our caster classes currently is, and maybe slightly above where our martial classes is. I definitely don't want to see everyone be on that caster class level of power, because it's getting a little wacky and zany out here in Darktide. It's feeling a lot more like an MMO than it is feeling like a actual like melee combat focused game, which is something that Darktide does so well and I miss so much. But there you have it. Thanks for watching, guys. If you made it this far, you are a true legend, and hopefully you're subscribed if you watched to the end. Thanks for watching. Love you. See you next time. Mystery out. Bye-bye.